Hello everyone, my name is Catalyst, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to the 5th episode of Battlefield Breakdown, a series in which I analyze elite Battlefield players' gameplay and explain why and how they are able to perform at such a high level. Well everybody, I have a bit of a confession to make. Up until this point, Battlefield Breakdown has been a series that has focused purely on active Battlefield 5 players, as it is the most recent game and thus holds the most to teach and learn in comparison to older games. And I said that it would stay that way. Yeah. I don't know if you could tell by the gameplay in the background. I kind of lied. Look, you can't make a series on the best Battlefield players and completely ignore some of the players playing on older titles. So today's episode is going to be a Battlefield 4 themed episode, and even more so, an episode featuring a couple of outstanding pilots that I have a huge amount of respect for. Before we get started today, just a quick reminder, the way the YouTube algorithm suggests content is based on how much you interact with it. So if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more of it, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and interact with the video in some way so you don't miss any future uploads or announcements. As a short rundown of how this series works, if you're new here, the players that will be featured in this series will all be content creators, as they are the most accessible for people who want to watch more if they do want to. As always, you are free to recommend players in the comment section below, and finally, this is not a conversation about who is the overall best player, but instead is a series that highlights certain things that players do exceptionally well. And today we have a special episode of Battlefield Breakdown, our first episode featuring multiple players on the same episode, and those players are Focus, otherwise known as OmniFocus, and the Australian farmer Silk 2G. If you have never watched either of the two before, I've chosen these guys for a few reasons. Firstly, I wanted to have one helicopter pilot and one jet pilot, and secondly, I wanted to choose some content creators that really know how to farm in their vehicles of choice. I do want to denote here that I did struggle a bit on how I wanted to classify these players, because I know that there is a large dogfighting community in Battlefield with multiple teams that all have pilots that are excellent in that form of competition, but I also didn't want to just downplay how good Focus and Silk are by calling them farm pilots, which they may or may not agree with that title, but just to not ruffle any feathers and not to sound facetious, I wanted to clear all of that up. With that being said, you've been watching Focus glide across the sky in the background gameplay, so let's go ahead and start with him. Ah yes, the Little Bird pilot, something that has given every Battlefield player severe PTSD, and for those of you who have never played against a good heli pilot, your time is coming in Battlefield 2042. You will get farmed. But Catalyst, I don't really... No. You will get farmed. Just ask these poor people in this opening clip from Focus. I think the thing that sticks out the most for me when it comes to how he plays is just the insane amount of control that he has over his vehicle and the impressive amount of hand-eye coordination that it takes to be able to effectively eliminate opponents at the pace that he's going to in this clip. And you'll notice this all immediately. I don't need to show you or tell you this. Focus runs a Little Bird loadout with ECM Jammer for quick and effective evasion from rockets and lock-ons, the belt feeder for maximum farm, and the ability to one-burst helis if he's accurate enough, and then finally 2 laser-guided smalls with the base kit miniguns. I think the mistake a lot of pilots would make when trying to understand what makes Focus successful in this clip is that newer pilots may look at his movement and think that flying erratically to dodge incoming fire is what is allowing him to stay alive, but Focus isn't flying erratically here. He's flying efficiently, and that's a huge difference. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting you don't fly evasively, but as you can see, the thing that sets Focus apart from other pilots is that he has mastered the ability to fly evasively but maintain his accuracy as if he were just flying still, and it does take an insane amount of hand-eye coordination, because when it comes to killing targets, he is following the moving crosshair in his cockpit. Speaking of his cockpit, you'll notice that he is consistently exiting into third-person view, and most of you know why this is, but in case you don't, Focus is doing this to check peripheral vision, spot enemies and threats, and when he is in first person, this is purely so he can maintain the best accuracy that he can. When you take all of that into account, it really explains why he's able to kill so many targets, including infantry and vehicles in this one clip, while maintain alive without any repairs for the majority of the clip. The more and more I watch good pilots fly, the more and more similarities I see between good vehicle players and good infantry players. Positioning really does matter. You'll hear that preached to you till you die, probably. And even more importantly, when flying, your spatial awareness matters. Focus is almost always checking his radar when he flies and has multiple backup plans in case he gets into a tight spot, which he will in this next clip that I'm going to take you through slowly and try and point out a few things. Right off the bat here, we're going to see Focus jump in and out of his helicopter, and you'll actually see him do this a lot when you watch his streams, and initially I thought this was just a stunt and something that was meant to look cool, but it actually has a purpose, because jumping in and out of your vehicle in Battlefield 4 and or switching seats removes any spotting that you have from the enemy team, and we will see Focus do this again a little bit later in the clip. He does a good job once again of hiding himself behind tall buildings before going for the boat in the water. Now Focus is going to get into a little bit of a trouble here, as I already said, and is going to be locked onto here without any ECM available. And before we see what happens, I want you to take a guess as to what he does. Does he A, turn and attack his attacker, B, hide behind the gas station, or C, turn around and fly back towards his spawn? I'll give you a few seconds. The answer is D. Dive downwards, fly under the bridge, and farm a different flag. I cannot tell you how impressive this is. Not only having the balls to do something like this, but to have the spatial awareness and speed control to safely navigate under the bridge, know the parameters of your helicopter, and making sure you don't crash. And, oh, watch this. So he seat switches to remove his spotting from the enemy and switches to a side seat, turns his heli horizontally, and gets a kill on a player before proceeding to farm the rooftops, and does a blink and you'll miss it seat switch here to remove spotting once again. I mean, I had to go frame by frame to see this one. He pops his ECM and continues to display excellent control and accuracy before he makes a mistake and goes under the wrong part of the bridge to try and escape again. Hey, sometimes good pilots make mistakes. Having the spatial awareness, positioning, and control to pull something like this off takes so much practice and time put in, and doesn't happen overnight. There were many nights spent farming trees in an empty Zavid 311 server, but it's turned Focus into one of the best heli pilots still playing. Moving on now from Focus, enters Silk, somebody who has deservedly gained a lot of traction on Twitch and YouTube recently, as he is a fantastic pilot and all-around great guy to talk to and watch. Whereas we had quite a few clips to look at with Focus, we are just going to have one long continuous gameplay today for Silk, as it's a massive farm on his part for starters, but I think it also does a better job at dictating the pace of the match and why Silk is making the decisions that he makes in real time. I think that it's easier to recognize that over a long gameplay where you can see the development of the map as opposed to watching a really good clip. For context here, Silk is playing with LG Reapers, who is also a Twitch streamer. Reapers was in the Scout Heli while Silk was in the Attack Jet. I really want you all to focus on the way that Silk navigates the map here and how he picks and chooses his targets, because on the surface level it seems really quite easy and simple, but the reality is that a lot of what Silk is able to do in the air is due to a very solid internal clock, good timing, and good aim. We've talked about it before in past episodes of Battlefield Breakdown, how players like Maxi keep a mental clock in their head so they can predict spawns and cut off rotations. Well, the same practice pertains to flying, and I would argue that it's actually more important while flying or playing vehicles. It's one thing predicting a spawn of waves of infantry. You know, there are so many variables, including what type of class that the players are spawning with and how many people, and is there a tank supporting them. But with flying, there are a limited amount of vehicles available. So more often than not, somebody is sitting on that spawn just waiting for the vehicle that they want and are going to jump in it as soon as it's available. So making sure that you have an accurate internal clock is crucial so you don't end up getting snuck up on. And throughout the gameplay, you will notice how Silk always manages to deal with jets and gunships with relative ease because internal timer is so accurate. Developing a good internal clock is so important so you could start preemptively looking for serious threats like stealth jets, as opposed to not keeping track of it and then casually thinking, I'm forgetting something, and then you're down and out of the fight. In watching the gameplay through a few times, I've also noticed that Silk tends to roam his side of the map and keep the enemy spawn in front of him, and I assume that this is so he can see enemy vehicle spawns more clearly. One more thing about technique is that Silk always switches to rear cam and back spots when pulling out of a strafe. This is something that you can do in this game in particular, but not in Battlefield 5 since spotting is a little bit different, and I don't think it works all that well in Battlefield 1 either. Regardless, this allows Silk to be extremely efficient in his second pass as opposed to not marking something like the attack boat and trying to find it again before shooting it. It kind of shows how OP spotting can be in previous Battlefield games. Silk also seems to have a very organized target prioritization system. First and foremost is the stealth jets, then attack jets, then AA, then boats, and last but not least, infantry. Of course, this is Paracel Storm, and the boats can be real mean on this map, so you'll see Silk go out of his way at some points to make sure that the boats don't go and farm friendly infantry. You'll notice that he has a very deliberate use of his ECM systems, and it's mostly when he is in one of three situations. Firstly, when he has just strafed an attack boat and he preemptively ECMs to avoid a counter TV missile, of which boats typically have two. The second most common use is when pulling up from a JDAM strike on ground targets, and then of course when he is being locked onto is the third most common occurrence, but you don't see that as often as you might think, and that's because, as we already discussed, Silk is extremely efficient with his flying, and his internal timer is so good that he has impeccable timing on spawning enemy vehicles, and he will go and get them before they pose any real threat. One thing that we sort of touched on early in the video, but unfortunately haven't seen really any examples of in the video yet, is dogfighting. But in planning this video, Silk was kind enough to give me some information and tips on dogfighting, and keep in mind that the mechanics differ from game to game, but the philosophy generally stays the same. He doesn't do it too often in this gameplay because the enemy jets were never really a threat, but we see early on in the gameplay where Silk sets up a head-on with the enemy jet, but the jet kind of flies forward and ignores him, which, had he known that Silk was in the jet, probably would have been the last decision that he should have been making. But Silk then goes after a second plane in the distance, gets a lot of damage on him, and the enemy pilot then tries to switch way too early. Silk sees it and kills him easily. Some good tips to take away is that when you're dogfighting, you should always try your best to finish your full loop, because if you break the loop or try and switch too early, which a switch is quite literally switching directions, your opponent will most likely see it and adjust. Again, with this example, the enemy stealth jet initially did the correct thing by turning into Silk to get Silk to pass him, but he didn't finish his loop and switched way too early into a vertical loop, which Silk saw with the rear view camera and adjusted into an upward helix to come around on the back end of the opposing pilot's loop and then finish him off. Paying attention to your rear cam is super important because it gives you a lot of information, but it also presents some mind games that, with a lot of practice on analyzing switching and knowing when to do what switches and where, well, again, that all comes down to practice. Silk is also making great use of his rudders here and is at the optimal speed, which is 313 kilometers per hour, which is a little bit more difficult for attack jets as opposed to stealth jets, which is why you saw Silk take a little bit more of an upward helix diagonal path as opposed to just countering the vertical loop. Dogfighting is a very loaded skill that requires a lot of practice, and again, as I mentioned earlier, there are specialists who do nothing but dogfight. I wish there were more examples to teach in this gameplay, but at the very least we touched on some basics and how Silk was able to completely destroy this pilot in just one move. Or, you know, he could just go ahead and JDAM them. Silk ends up going flawless in this gameplay, 72-0, and that's really impressive, so I would suggest watching his streams because he does this regularly and is very genuinely a great pilot. That's the end of the episode, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank both Focus and Silk for collaborating with me on this episode and for sending me their gameplay. I greatly appreciate it, gentlemen. Who would you like to see me break down next? Comment down below. Next week, we will be returning to boots on the ground gameplay, where my area of expertise lies, and we can actively all go back to hating pilots again. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like the video and interact with it. Subscribe if you're new, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss another upload or episode. I stream 4 nights a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on my Twitch. Link is in the description below. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. My name is Catalyst, and I will see you all another time.